Hello, I'm Victoria Pearce. I'm the Director of Endangered Heritage, and I run a lab that looks after people's artwork and heritage artefacts, nostalgia, sentimental items. We look after all sorts of things for our large institutions and museums, but also for families. But there's an awful lot that we can't do, and that's completely unscramble the egg. We need you to be looking after your things, so we've created a set of tutorials so that you can actually do the best by the things that you care about for yourself at home. So today I want to talk about framing. There's an awful lot of really bad framing out there, an astounding amount, and you pay a fortune for it. There's an awful lot of really good framing, but without a little bit of background knowledge, it's almost impossible to know which is which. One of the things that astounds me is how loyal people seem to be to their framers. Oh, my framer did a great job, blah, blah, blah. And then 10 years later, we get the object, open the frame and find the jolly thing with sticky tape down. So let's start making some consumer awareness on what really looking after your objects means. And let's start with framing. First of all, framing is a tough gig on an object. It's really tough. It's hard work being on display, performing for the public, 24/7, up on the wall, exposed to light, parties, noise, vibration, insects, humidity, temperature change. Things on display full time are going through a rough time. Framing is not conservation. Framing is display. Framing isn't taking care of your things. Framing is taking your things that you really care about, and sure, you get to enjoy them every day, but it's also wearing them out. It's not always sustainable. So people are often surprised when they bring things into endangered heritage that we actually advise them that this thing's already faded so much, we don't recommend it's framed. We don't recommend it go on display anymore. If you really want to conserve it, framing is not necessarily the answer. If you want to have something on display, that's a different question. There are safe ways and better ways to do it than just shoving it in a frame. 3D objects, for example, can really benefit from having some extra airspace and being in a vitrine. You're putting things like garments or t-shirts pressed up hard against the glass, not knowing if there's insect eggs on them, not being able to monitor the back of them. That's actually a really big ask on a 3D object. Sadly, I remember a client bringing me a christening gown that had been framed, a beautiful silk christening gown with the most exquisite handmade lace and embroidery. And when we took it out of the frame, the entire back of the garment had been eaten away by insects that were trapped inside the frame, and all they were left with was the fabric that was facing the light. And that had been going on in front of their very faces every day, and they hadn't been able to do anything about it because it was all squished together in a frame, being made impossible to be able to monitor that object. You won't see that happen in museums with 3D objects. You'll see things go into showcases. So we can actually create small little showcases customized for the object. So think about that. If you've got things squished into the frame, not a good idea, especially if it's touching the glazing. Maintenance. Let's first of all talk about maintenance. The problem with our artwork is that we actually take it for granted. We decorate our homes, we put things up on the wall, and they become the objects of our periphery. We walk past them every day. We grab our things, we kind of acknowledge the decor as a whole, but we don't actually stop and look at our artwork. So this evening, pour a nice glass of wine and actually appreciate the artwork that you've spent money on to decorate your home, or that's been handed down to you, that you've become the custodian of. Have a good hard look. Walk around every room with a nice glass of wine and enjoy it. Here's some of the things you've got to look out for. In this artwork here, you can see that the mat has become really brown around the edges. That's acidity. That's a non-conservation grade mat that's full of acidity, and over time it's gone yellow and brown, like an old newspaper left in the sun. That brownness now is an indication that the entire interior of the frame is bathing in those acidic fumes, including your artwork. It needs to come out. You need a conservation mat and safely, probably more space on the back of the frame. On this one, you can also see that the board on the back of the frame is also browning and going quite nasty. That's also more acidity. The timber of your frame also has natural formaldehydes, turpentines, timber acids and things. They're accumulating in your frame. So all of those things actually put your artwork in quite an acidic environment over time. So, I mean, I've actually had one textile that had been in a frame for about 50 years. And when we took it out, I pH tested it and it was the same pH as lemon juice. Obviously, that's not particularly good for an embroidery. So, step one, check them. Is there insect activity? Moths, activity like frass and sand. And I've done an insect tutorial, so check that out. If there's insects or leaves or wings and things all caught inside the frame, then it needs to be looked at. If there's acidity building up in the frame, it needs to be looked at. If you're starting to see foxing and other staining, which you can see on this artwork here, that needs to be looked at. So framing, as I said, is really hard work on an artwork. And the air that accumulates inside this frame shouldn't be left to accumulate to become really acidic. It's like putting a sandwich in a Tupperware, leaving it for 10 years and then wanting to eat it. It's kind of a little bit crazy. All of this material is organic and it's all breaking down to become more acidic over time, which is why professional conservators insist on having alkali or at least pH neutral materials encased in the frame. That material doesn't stay acid free forever, but it's absorbing the acidity that's accumulating in the frame until it reaches equilibrium. Once it has, the whole lot's going to become more acidic over time. That's when you need to replace the framing materials. You need new mats, you need new backing boards. Roughly every 10 years, it's a good idea to open a frame, check an artwork, give it some fresh air, let it breathe, see whether it's fading or not, and actually maintain it. Things that are left in a frame are not assets. They're depreciating if they're not being cared for. So what's your alternative to putting an original artwork that's going through that incredibly hard rigor and workout being on display all of the time? This is one of the things that we do in our museums and collections. It's called an encapsulation. It's basically archival blue board at a pH of 8.9 with mylar, which is polyester, and the object is safely put in here. It's not a lamination. Don't laminate. It's not a lamination, but it's safe. It can be handled, it can be displayed. You can even write the story of what the object is and who it belonged to on the back. And you can keep it, seal it up with the double-sided tape and keep it safe from insects. This is actually really great storage, and in our museums and collections, we have hundreds of these put away in map drawers. I don't think that we could afford to have everything framed and be storing everything in frames. Things usually stay in a frame for about 3 to 6 months, maximum of 2 years, and then we rotate. We don't just rotate our collections for public interest. We rotate our collections because it's really hard work being on display all of the time. So, the other option for an object that's really vulnerable is something like this. This is a drafting drawing with stamps that will fade, signatures on it that will fade if it goes on light display. But the client here really wants to put this design on display in a frame. So we've had some digital reproductions done. So this reproduction, photographically printed out in G-clay, which is an archival photographic process, can now go safely into a frame, remind the family, share the stories, be on display, while the original goes into dark storage and remains your master copy, not getting more damaged for the next generation. Digital retouch, digital restorations also possible in this step. So talk to us if you have any ideas about wanting to put things on display, particularly documents and things that have these sorts of rubber stamps. The other one that really, really disappoints so many people is degrees and documents. When the original goes into a frame, the signatures fade out. You might be left with the rest of the degree, but without the signature, it isn't a legal document anymore. Always put your degrees and things as facsimiles into a frame. Keep your master copy. It's your credibility. You're going to be asked to show that to people. You want a facsimile in a frame under light conditions. So while we're talking about light, what exactly do we do in our institutions and museums for glazing? Because there's a lot of debate. Framers will talk about museum quality glass and museum transparency and talk about non-reflective glass. Well, let's throw a little science into this marketing spin. If it's not reflecting light and you haven't changed the light levels, that means it must be transmitting the light, sending more light into your object. Light's not disappeared. You've just changed the surface of the glass so that more light goes through, less reflects. That is going to do a lot more damage to your artwork and fade it faster. Glass actually is not something we use in our art galleries and museums anymore. We haven't since about 1982. Can you imagine the liability of having a large painting in a public space and a 3-year-old runs into it or knocks it off the wall? What about the liability of having $1 million painting behind glass and it gets dropped and the glass slices the canvas? It's nuts. Of course we don't use glass anymore. It's heavy. We need to tour our collections around the countryside. And here's another little problem with glass. It transmits UV and high frequency light, about 10% of it. So just like we all get more sun damage from driving and getting burnt through the glass of our car window, our artwork is as well. We actually use perspex or polycarbonate, acrylic or polyester. All of them stop high frequency light energy. Not all light energy, some light's still getting through or wouldn't be transparent. But the high frequency, that UV high energy end that's doing the most of the damage, those plastics actually absorb that energy. That's why they go brown and they craze and they get the craquelure across them. That's because they have sacrificially absorbed that damaging light energy, thus protecting your artwork behind them. So, you want to really protect your artwork, don't use glass at all. We only frame here with perspex and a very high quality one or a polycarbonate, because if the artwork gets dropped, it doesn't get sliced. If the artwork needs to go on display in high light levels, it's not going to fade as quickly. And for the price of switching out your frame in 10 years, which you're meant to open and check anyway, changing a $15 piece of perspex just makes good sense. It's sacrificially protected your artwork. We're here to help you look after your heritage at Endangered Heritage. So follow us on our website for updates. You'll find that there's a link to insects and in our disaster recovery area. And look out for more of our videos on disaster recovery and other problems that you can experience in your collection.